won't do that. So welcome to this afternoon session on springing into Kotlin, how to make the magic even more magical. My name is Mark Heckler, and this is the best way to reach me. Well, actually, the bottom line is how the best way to reach me. I live on Twitter, sun up to sundown, whatever time zone I'm in, and I have been known to sleep tweet. So for those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know that, and for those of you who don't, why? Why do you not follow me on Twitter? Seriously, though, that's where your favorite open source framework committers hang, right? That's the best way to reach pretty much any of us. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I can almost guarantee now we're not going to have time at the end, but please do catch up with me either later this evening or tomorrow. I'll be here as well. I have another talk tomorrow afternoon. But if you think of something later and you want to throw it out to me as a question, comment, or feedback, I'm always happy to receive those. Please just tweet me, MKHeck. If you don't want to share it on public Twitter, I have my direct messages open, so DM me. It's private and it's fine. So just shoot me a message. If you're not a member of Twitter, can't stand Twitter, have more comments, questions, or feedback than will fit in 280 characters. I'm also a member of the slightly older and more established social network called Email. Anyone on Email? Okay, good. So that we have a lowest common denominator established here. So that's cool. Just send me an email, mark@thehecklers.com or mheckler@pivotal.io. Those are the email addresses that I check the least infrequently. So with that, let's get started. So who am I? I've authored several blogs and blog posts. I've co-authored a couple of books. I've contributed content and code to several other books, a few of which actually even recognize my contributions. That was nice, right? Those who didn't, well, I wasn't planning to live off the royalties anyway, so no big deal. I am an architect and developer, and as you might surmise from the next point, where most of my expertise has been won, it's been in the Java ecosystem. So Java, Groovy, Kotlin, what have you. I am a Java champion, Java 1 Rockstar, Groundbreaker Ambassador, a few other nice awards and names that will, combined with a few dollars or euros, will get you a nice latte at places. I am a professional problem solver. That's not my official title, it's just what I do. It's what you do too, right? This is our life, which is cool. But officially, I am a Spring developer and advocate. I work for Pivotal, I'm on the Spring team, and I code and I talk about code. So that's my life. And I drink a lot of coffee, by the way. Anybody who, again, follows me on Twitter knows it. I am the creator and sole curator of Spring Noticias en Español. So if you're un hispanohablante and you share stuff, you have material you want to share, ping me, because I'm happy to share that with the greater community and amplify your voice. So with that in mind, I always feel weird about this talk because I say how to make the magic more magical. And that's kind of a pleasant dig at those who say, Spring, it's too magic, it's full of magic. I love this quote by Arthur C. Clarke: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which tells you exactly what Spring Boot is. It's technology. It's advanced technology, right? It's not that hard. I think it is a little jarring when you come into it from an environment where you have to write everything tediously and write all the code. Spring Boot makes you much, much, much more productive. I've had this conversation with good friends, even as recently as a few minutes ago. It makes you crazy productive. It gives you superpowers. But if you don't want that, if you want to walk the earth instead of flying over it, you can hand code everything. You don't have to take advantage of all the power that Spring Boot gives you, but you can. It seems kind of silly not to, right? So Spring Boot gives you a few different things. Evgeny mentioned the deployment, the deployables that you can create with it, but it also gives you simplified dependency management. Why is that important? Because instead of having pages and pages and pages of independently provided dependencies, we all as developers provide capabilities. And to provide a capability, typically you have to involve multiple libraries, right? Multiple dependencies. And 99% of the time we use the same dependencies together to do a thing. So it kind of makes sense to create starter POMs that kind of wrap these together and again, elevates your coding where you're not having to go through and figure out, like this version of this goes with that version of that, because it version synchronizes those as well. So you have a known working state. It also has auto configuration, which allows you to, again, focus on the things that you want to do, because Spring Boot will take a look at your code, your annotations, your properties, and your class path, and it'll say, hey, look, I understand what you're trying to accomplish here. Let me help you. You can overwrite all of that. Again, you can write it by hand, but it helps make you vastly more productive. So, not magic, technology. So today, specifically, we're talking about Kotlin. Starting with, I guess, let me give a little bit of background. Spring Framework 5 came out in September of 2017. And when it came out, when it was generally available, hit GA, it had three basic stories to it. One is it replatformed from Java 6 as a baseline to Java 8, so we can take advantage of the cool stuff like lambdas and completable futures and things like that. Let's see, what else? Well, I mean, there were two other things. That was one, and I'm drawing a complete blank on another. But the third one is what I'm here to talk about today, which is full first-class support for Kotlin, right? Why? Why is that important? Kotlin has kind of taken the world by storm. It seemed to come out of nowhere, except it didn't, right? It built a loyal following and just kind of had this groundswell that, unless you were really looking for it, you might have missed. A couple of years ago, Google said that it was an authorized way of developing Android applications. Last year at Google I/O, they said the preferred way. Spring Framework embraced this as a preferred way, a full first-class citizen, equal on footing with Java as a way to develop Spring Boot and Spring Framework applications. This was not a decision made lightly, but Kotlin gives you a lot of capabilities that Java has in the works or is being planned. Java has 20 plus years of legacy, and the designers of Java are super good about maintaining backward compatibility and making sure stuff doesn't break, being very thoughtful and methodical about how new features are implemented. The problem, of course, is this slows them down a little bit sometimes. So if there's a feature you've heard about, you think that will be implemented, that is on the roadmap, chances are it might already be in Kotlin now, so you can use that. It's also really interoperable with Java and Kotlin. So you can slowly migrate applications or step-by-step migrate applications should you choose to do so. Of course, greenfield applications are fine, brownfield, slow migrations, or all-in-one migrations. Those are abilities you have. The decisions are in your hands. So I've kind of spoken a bit to the whys. Why switch from Java? Again, that greater productivity. Java, this may surprise a few of you, but Java for years has been criticized as being overly verbose. Anyone ever heard that? No one, right? I've never been that down on verbosity, because if you provide more text and it gives you a clearer understanding of what's going on, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because the compiler reads your code once, you read your code day after day after day. So understanding what's happening in your code is very important. However, if there's a way to say the same thing more concisely and keep all of the context, wouldn't that, in much less code, wouldn't that be something you'd be interested in? So, I mean, it kind of makes sense. That's where Kotlin comes in. It's not terse, you don't lose context, it's concise. So you keep the context, it's very elegant and efficient in terms of the code volume, but it maintains the context and the understanding that it means to convey. I think I've already covered pretty well what do we gain. Is it worth it? Well, I leave that for you to decide. I feel like it is. I'm a fan, but that's a decision you have to make. Those are the numbers you have to crunch. So today we're going to go through, and I'm actually going to code so you can see it in action and see kind of how it feels and how it fits. We'll establish some quick victories, sort of my recommendations on how you can gain the most ground the fastest with the least pain. And then we'll lay the groundwork for longer term gains and see where we go from there. So let's code. This is my seat. This is the hot seat. Everything I do is live coded, so should work, probably. If not, we've got how many developers in here? We can mob program this thing. We'll get there. So let's go close this out. And yes, we're mirrored. Excellent. Okay, so we'll start here at the Spring Initializer. If you haven't been to the Spring Initializer in a while, this is a new look, but it's a lot of the same functionality. Again, we've tried to refine it, streamline it. Still working out, kind of where we're headed with this. If you have any feedback, if you notice up here, take the survey, give us some feedback on what you like, what you don't like, what you think might be missing or could be improved. Happy to work on that. What I'd like to do, because so many of us have a lot of applications that we're working with and we're maintaining, and they make our company's money, which is a good thing, right? Because that pays our bills, that pays our salaries. And it would be a wonderful thing if our boss came to us maybe Monday morning and said, hey, I have a new project. I want you to write this, anything you want to write it in. Just Spring Boot and Kotlin, that sounds great. Give it a shot. I mean, that would be great to have a greenfield application dumped in our laps. And if that happens to you, Great. That's amazing. Seize that and go for it. But most of us work with a lot of brownfield applications, right? Critical applications to our company or our organization. So I'm going to start off with the assumption that we're going to take a brownfield application, an existing Spring Boot and Java application, and start migrating it. Now, I don't have one of those handy, so what I'm going to do is very quickly create one, and then we'll see kind of how it all fits together, Java-wise, runs, works, and then we'll take it over to Kotlin. But as a bit of an indulgence, what I'm going to do now is start off with a Kotlin project. I'll create the Kotlin project using Initializer because that lets me show you some things in the Kotlin build file and what have you. And it also lets me show how easy it is to switch back and forth. I do recommend that if you have an existing Spring Boot Java application that you go through the Initializer, this is recommendation 1, and create a new project with Kotlin. Because that way you get your build file structure, and that way you can see exactly how it kind of correlates. You can copy paste in, and you don't have to worry about typos, and it just eliminates a lot of potential headaches we could hit. So we're going to start off here. You can do Maven or Gradle. I'm feeling kind of hipstery today, so I'm going to choose Gradle. And we're going to, I'm working with Kotlin. I mean, why not, right? The other nice thing that this allows me to do, and of course, Maven is fully supported, but we create, if you're creating a Kotlin application, it'll create your build file using Kotlin as well. So your build.gradle is typically Groovy, but it can also support and does support Kotlin. That's what we're doing. So 2.1.5, current version of Spring Boot. I'm going to change this to the Hecklers because it won't work otherwise. Kidding. Because I can. I mean, why not? And in terms of an example, they always tell you to do what you love in life. That's kind of the life advice you always hear, right? Well, those of you who know me know that I love coffee. So we're going to talk coffee today. Probably again tomorrow too, for that matter, because you have to have a domain, right? So I'm going to keep things pretty simple here. I'm going to create a simple web application using Spring MVC. So we're going to do servlet-based, Tomcat. And then I'm going to use Mongo for my underlying data store because you have to, well, you don't have to, but typically an application has an underlying data store, right? Can. And then I'm going to use embedded Mongo because it makes me happy. And I'll explain that here in a moment. So I'm going to generate the project. And Wi-Fi, where is the Wi-Fi? Waiting for start.spring.io. Here we go. Waiting. You can do it. Well, we may be tethering here in a moment. Let's see. This has been a fun session so far. Let's let me just see if I can tether. And that's one way to scare it into complying anyway. So hotspot and tethering. There we go. Wow, that's awkward. Okay, well, fortunately, we don't need a lot of bandwidth to do this. I just need to connect to something that will connect out. So come on, you can do it. Oh, look at that. Okay, so we are now connected to my phone. And just in case, because I don't want to run out of power and have this die in the middle, I'm going to plug my phone into my laptop. Oh, this has been an interesting time. Oh, and of course, I have to have an adapter for that, which I do have. Somewhere. Well, maybe I don't. Okay, we'll just continue and hopefully this will all work and we'll maintain charge on the phone long enough. Okay, generate project. Yes, okay, so that works much better when you actually have a connection. Okay, so I'm just going to go out here and I'm going to unzip this. We just generated a shell project for those of you who aren't familiar with the way the Spring Initializer works. It doesn't really create any code other than your main application class and main method, but that's sufficient, right? It gets us our build file and what have you. Let me see, let me go into distraction-free mode. Actually, I do want to do this so I can show you this. So my build file, there we go. Okay. So here's the build file. And this is pretty simple. I actually am going to, this is going to have to try to update over this too. Wow. So I'm going to use the current version of Kotlin. I'm not sure exactly why this is still pulling in the 1.2.7.1 apply dependencies. Hopefully the connection will sort itself out while we're discussing this. But it's a fairly straightforward build file. So we have a few different plugins here that we're using. Let's see, we have the basic information here. We're baselining source compatibility at 1.8. We're going to rely on Maven Central for our repositories. Oh, it's saying that since we have so much code in our project, it's saying, hey, since you changed your Kotlin plugin and your Kotlin dependency here, let's make sure it works. And surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, it does work. I'm going to change here the embedded Mongo from just a test implementation to implementation, so we can use that. And there we go. Save. Apply dependencies. And the reason I use embedded Mongo is because I just love the name. My heritage mostly is German. And embedded Mongo was created by a fine German fellow with a finely honed sense of humor, like all Germans have, right? He named it Flapdoodle. I mean, this is not something you'd expect from a German, right? I don't know. But anyway, I just love it. It works really well. I like it for demos. So, you know, there must be some Germans in the audience because I only heard a few people laugh. Okay, anyway, all right. So a few things here. We've got our free compiler args. We're using JSR 305 compliant annotations to indicate what's nullable and what's not in terms of the Spring framework that we're going to be consuming. And the JVM target is 1.8. Why is that important? Anyone? Because Kotlin defaults to version 6 of Java because it's Android. It targets Android as well. We don't care. We're not using Android, so we'll go on up to 8 here. So that's fine. So let's go to our, actually I'm going to reopen this from distraction free mode so I can take a look over here. Here we have our directories structure, our packaging. So if you look at this, we have parallel packaging for Java and Kotlin. What I recommend you do, what I think is a really good habit to get into, is to create parallel packaging for the two, right? So that we can have the same thing. Now I've got to zoom that back out. There we go. So the Hecklers.coffee service. You don't have to do this particularly, but I think it's a good habit to have, because that way you keep your Java stuff with your Java and your Kotlin code with in your Kotlin packaging. So let's start by taking a look at our main application class. Very simple. Again, we created this as a Kotlin application, but let's change this out and let's take this and make it a Java application just so we can, again, start with the idea of a brownfield app. So I change it from a .kt or a Kotlin source file to a .java source file. So we refactor it. And there, of course, we see that IntelliJ is a bit unhappy with us. But we also see that the file itself, it doesn't really, doesn't show that. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we now have a Java application. We're going to just relocate that here to our Java package structure. And then let's change this back to where we have a Java application. So the first thing I'm going to do is add semicolons. Kotlin doesn't require them. Java does. So we'll just add those back in, and that makes things a bit happier. I'm just going to delete that, and we'll create our public static void main, and we'll do our Spring application.run. We'll use our coffee service application.class and our args, and that's it. So now we'll run this just to make sure that we have a working Java application to start with. It really doesn't do anything at this point, but it should boot up, should start. So it's working. That's great. Let's get busy coding. So the first thing we probably want to do now is to create what? Let's create our domain. Again, we're talking about coffees. And we're going to be storing our coffees as documents in a MongoDB data store, right? So I'm going to create my ID field. That's a private string ID, right? And we're going to have a couple other fields here. We're going to have a name for our coffee and a code. And that's just a way that we can have a more web-friendly kind of amalgamation of our name. We'll concatenate that in lowercase so we can easily access that via web apps. So that gets us our basic domain, very simple. Now we need to create a constructor, and we'll have a noargs constructor, noargs constructor for JSON marshalling and unmarshalling, new constructor, there we go. And then we want a constructor that will allow us to specify a name. Mongo will provide our ID, right? So we don't need to specify that. And our code is a derived value, again, based on the name, so we won't need to provide that. But we will need this constructor. And then we also will need some getters and setters, or if you feel fancy, accessors and mutators. I have a good friend of mine who told me once he liked to refer to them as that because it made him feel smarter. If it makes you happy, do that. That's good. Okay, so we're going to, whoops. So we're going, actually, you know what? Let me take that back to distraction-free mode. So we got a bit nicer view there. Okay, so now we need to add our equals and hash code, right? So we can compare. So we'll compare objects, that's all good. And then we need to probably do our toString. That's great, very simple. Now again, we want to change a few things here. We don't want to allow necessarily open changes to our ID because again, Mongo is going to assign that. When we have our set code, we're actually going to again derive that from the name. So we'll just do, keep this again fairly simple. So name dot to lowercase dot replace. We'll replace any spaces with dashes, and that's good. Now when we set the name, of course, we should call set code with our name. And upon creation, we should also do the same thing. So again, this is kind of a short, quick, and dirty way to get about it, but that should work, right? So that's our domain. So now we need to probably go back and do a couple other things. We need to create a coffee repository and we'll make this an interface. This is how we will interact with our data store. Those of you familiar with Spring Data know that we have, a couple different levels of support for various data stores. At a very fundamental level, everything's pretty much supported via template. But at a higher level, most data stores you can actually engage at a repository level. And Spring Boot does a wonderful thing because when you have an interface that extends in your code, that extends an interface defined in Spring Data, like the CRUD repository, for instance, and we'll be storing items of type coffee with IDs of type string. When you have an interface that extends a Spring Data interface defined in your code, and you have a database driver on your class path, Spring Boot rightly determines that you probably want to talk to a database. This is what some folks call magic. I can't explain it. But anyway, pretty simple stuff. And this gets you basic functionality across a lot of different databases. So things like find one, find all, delete one, delete all, get a count of all documents in the data store, records. And that is pretty universal, right? But if you need the ability to extend that, you have that as well. So you can, by convention, you can define different, a query method signature, and Spring Data will provide that implementation for you. So if you want to return a coffee, for instance, and find by name, there we go. And of course, you're going to be providing a name to search on. That's sufficient for Spring Data to provide the implementation for you. Now, if you really want to get fancy, you can provide a query. So if you're using a SQL database, for instance, using JPA, you can provide JPQL, you can use Spring Expression Language, you can, like if you're using Neo, you can use Cypher. It gives you a lot of different capabilities and the ability to kind of define this all the way down, or even SQL if you're using a SQL data store. We don't have anything quite that exotic in terms of requirements, so we're going to stay pretty plain and vanilla with that. And then we're going to go back and create from there a controller. So we'll do a coffee controller, and let's do that really quickly. So we have a REST controller. We're going to need to provide REST endpoints here, and we're going to provide our base mapping of coffees. All right. So very simply, we'll need just a few endpoints. We want to retrieve all coffees, right? And actually, I should have my coffee repo here, so I can I'm going to inject that via constructor injection so I can access that and interact with my data store. So I'm injecting my coffee repository bean into my controller. So I'm going to return an iterable of coffees, right? Get all coffees. And again, pretty simple. We're just going to hit the repo, do a find all, and that's it. So now we will want to probably return a particular coffee by its ID. So we'll return, actually, it'll return an optional. Actually, you know what? Let's just cut right to the chase. We'll return a coffee, get coffee by ID, and we'll use path variable, string ID, and return repo.find by ID for the ID, and then we'll do a get. So we'll just short circuit that again, just in the interest of time. And then I'm going to do one more get mapping so that we can do a search. because there may come a time we'll want to, typos, we'll want to be able to search based upon a particular coffee's name. We won't know its ID. So we'll return, once again, a coffee, search for coffee. Sounds like a great movie name, wouldn't it? The search for coffee. Anyway, okay, so we're going to use a request parameter to provide that, and we're going to say it's not required because we may want to provide some kind of capability where somebody just accidentally searches with nothing, or that provide a house coffee that we provide, or a coffee of the day, so we can automatically provide that with an empty search, so to speak. So we'll use string name, and let me just close. In fact, let me just go back to distraction free. There we go. So how do we do this? Well, let's see. So what we should probably do is just return. So repo dot find by name, right? So name. And that works really well if there is a name specified, but we may not. Again, we made this optional. So what we should probably do is check first to see if it equals null, right? And do something. And if it doesn't, then we can do this. That's perfectly fine in that case. But what happens here? Well, I always try to adhere to the principle of least astonishment. So I think it makes sense to default to something. We'll first, again, for simplicity today, we'll just do a repo.findAll. We'll grab the iterator and grab the first record, and that'll provide our default. So that doesn't look terrible. But now, in order to go ahead and do anything with this, we just need some data. So let's go back to our main application class. We'll create a bean that implements command line runner. If you look at the command line runner, it's what? It's a functional interface with a single abstract method. Now, since Java 8, what can we do when we have a functional interface with a single abstract method? Anyone? Lambda. We can provide the implementation as a Lambda. So I'm going to demo data, and I'm going to inject my coffee repository so I can use that. And here's our Lambda, return args, boom, boom, that's it. So we need some data. So here's the audience participation part. This is the most important part, garbage in, garbage out. We don't want garbage out. So we need to create a list of coffees. Does anyone have a favorite coffee here? Cappuccino, okay. The spelling is always tough. C-A-P-P-U-C-C-I-N-O or two P's? Two P's, okay. See, that's what I'm telling you. Hard to believe spelling was once my best subject in school. Okay. Anyone else? Favorite coffees? Okay, what was? Oh, this is a man after my own heart. Double espresso. What was that? Oh, okay. Macchiato. And somebody had one back here. There always has to be that one person. Irish coffee. I have to tell you, one place I did this, they yelled out something, and I wasn't sure whether they said urban coffee or bourbon coffee. So I asked, and legitimately, they did say bourbon coffee. I didn't even know that was a thing. That sounds wonderful. Okay, anyone else? Somebody up here? You know what? Okay, that's fine. We'll stop there. What's that? Americano? Okay, we can do that. How nice of you. Americano. What is my favorite? It's so hard to choose. I either will do an Americano or an espresso or double or triple, whatever. So far I haven't found a mechanism of delivery of coffee that I don't like. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question, but all right. So we've got our list of coffees, and we're going to stream those, right? And we'll map those. These are just coffee names. So we will, what am I doing? I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to create a new coffee, and we'll use our name. And then I'm just going to do a for each, and we'll take each of those coffees, and we'll do a repo.save of our coffees. And that is a pretty good thing, but in order to verify what we actually have, I'm going to do a repo.findAll.forEach, and we'll do a system.out print line so we can see what's really there. And that's pretty good. But the problem is that each time we restart this, it's going to try to add those same records to the data store. And what I want to do, just to make sure we have good database hygiene here, is just do a repo.deleteAll to start off with, and that way we know everything's clean when we start it. So let's run this, and we'll see what we have. Okay, so we're up and running. Well, I guess I should point down here. We have our coffees. It looks like they're being persisted, right? That looks nice. We see that our codes here are just a combination of the name of the coffee, lowercase, concatenated, all that's good. So I don't have terminal up here, terminal. So let's blow that up. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so I use HTTPy instead of curl. So does anyone know HTTPy? It's curl for humans. And it's really nice. It also gives you this beautiful formatting, right? And it allows you to skip the local host. It assumes localhost if you don't provide it, so it saves some time. But we've got here our list of coffees. So if we go then and grab the Irish coffee ID, here's looking at you, and we'll load that up, and that works. Now if we go and we do our search, name equals, and let's see, what else do we have? Double espresso. We'll do double espresso. And I'm using Z shell, so I need to quote that. And that works. But now if we just do a search, that also works. And that returns our first record. So again, everything works, even if we provide a null value for search. So that's our Java application. Now, let's make it better. Let's improve this. Let's take this over to Kotlin. All right, so take this out. And let's start with our coffee class. So we've got our coffee class, and I'm just going to change this. Come on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to change this from coffee.java to coffee.kt, and that's a Kotlin class file then. So we'll refactor it, and we see now, again, that IntelliJ is very unhappy, but we also see that it rightly determines that this is a it is a Kotlin file. We can't really call it a Kotlin class yet, but it is a Kotlin file. So we're going to next take that and we'll move that down to our Kotlin package here. So just bring that down and let's get started. So the first thing that you might see is we've got a grayed out public visibility modifier, right? And that's because in Kotlin, unlike Java, the default visibility for pretty much everything is public. So this is superfluous. We don't need this. It's just added cruft. So we can eliminate that. The way Kotlin handles member variables and getters and setters is a little bit different than the way Java handles that versus Kotlin. Kotlin doesn't have member variables and getters and setters. It has properties. And again, properties default visibility is public. So you don't have to create member variables and getters and setters. Now you can set up where you can only do a getter, for instance, or a get on a Kotlin property. You can tweak that all you want, but generally speaking, most of the time, what do? We create getters and setters, and most of the time they're just simple gets and sets, right? So we don't have to have any complex logic. So this kind of streamlines that dramatically. Now I'm going to, and I guess I should also say that in Java, we have many times many constructors. We'll have a no-arg constructor. We'll also have a constructor with every argument in it. And then we'll have a lot of them in between because we have to cover all those different ways of constructing an object of a particular type of class, right? Kotlin, due to various different constructs it has and capabilities, typically you only require a single constructor. Now it has primary constructors and secondaries, but most of the time a primary constructor does the job. So I'll show you how that happens. And if you have a primary constructor, you can put it right up here in the class header. So we start off with that. So I'm just going to start there, and then I'm going to we'll kill that. We'll come back to code here in a moment. And that just goes ahead and clears that up. I'm going to bring this up. We can still keep our annotations here, and that's fine. Kotlin lays things out a little bit differently when you create your parameters / properties here in the constructor, right? So for starters, again, we're going to want that public visibility, so we have getters and setters. We don't use type and variable name. We use variable name :type. Seems like a small thing, and it really is, but it's a switch. And we can define this as being mutable with a var, so it's a variable, or a val, which is a value. So it's like a Java final. It's settable 0 or 1 times, right? Once, that's it. And that gets us our ID. Man, I keep hitting the wrong keys here. There we go. Okay. And then we also, for our name, we'll do a val name string, and that handles that pretty nicely. Now, in Kotlin, Kotlin is a null safe language. So if you're dealing with just Kotlin, and it says that you have a string, you literally have a string, right? There's no chance that that will be null. If you want to, in some way, make that nullable to allow a value to be null, it's not a string anymore. What you do is you add a character to it, a single character, and it just tells you that it goes from being a string to a string. It's it. You just add the question, because all of a sudden you have a question, is this really a string or not? So it goes from being a string, I'll do that one more time, string to a string. Inflection is important, right? So that allows us to assign a null value. Now, I'm just going to, or just allow it to be null. I'm going to say the default value, because we have default values for constructors here in Kotlin as well. The default value is null. The reason that's okay is because, again, Mongo is going to be providing that for us. We don't need to provide it. And that way, in a constructor coming from Java, we can have that placeholder there. So here, again, for our name, we don't want to allow it nullable, but we want to provide a default value here, and we'll just say cup o Joe. So if we don't provide a particular name for a coffee, this is what we get. Kind of sad, right? Okay, so since we have our default, I should also say that this is kind of a very common construct. So in Kotlin, you don't even need the constructor keyword. Saves you quite a bit, right? So we go in here, we already have our primary constructor, which again, we can overload it, or it kind of covers all the various different scenarios in Java that you need different constructors. So we can get rid of our constructors. I'm just going to keep this here as a mental placeholder so we can come back to our code. And in terms of our properties, of course, we can get and set those unless we specify otherwise. So we can get rid of all of our getters and setters. So those all go away. Now, Kotlin has the concept of a data class, because for domain classes, many times what we use them for is storing and retrieving data. That's pretty much it. So we'll grab data, we'll place data, we'll compare it with various different objects of a particular type and make sure that they match or don't match. So we have that baked into the language, right, as a data class. And as such, the data class means that it provides implementations of equals, hashcode, toString, copy functions, things like that. So we can get rid of that too. But what happens if you want to override something? So if we don't like the toString that it provides, if we want to override that, can we do that? And the answer, of course, to that is, of course. Kotlin doesn't have methods. It has functions. So we can get to this, and we'll change this to a fun, right? We'll override it, because, of course, again, toString is provided for us unless we say otherwise. The keyword for function is fun in Kotlin, which is why everybody walks around saying with a big smile on their face that everything is fun in Kotlin. I did not make that up. Don't blame me for that. But it's kind of true, right? I mean, it is a fun language to develop in, and it just happens to use that word. So that's something. Another nice thing about Kotlin is that pretty much everything is an expression, which means everything returns a value. So if you have a single statement in your function body, that's your entire function, you can just take the return value from that and do a direct assignment. So you can do this and get rid of your return, right? And of course, get rid of the semicolon because it's not Java, and get rid of this. And that cleans that up nicely, except we still have this kind of weird amalgam of stuff that we are so used to seeing in Java, we almost become numb to it. That's ugly, right? We're concatenating strings and values, and it's just terrible. But with Kotlin, you have string templates. So we can shorten this up pretty dramatically with a variable $ID, right? We'll do the same thing here with name. And there we go. And the same thing here with code. And of course, we haven't created our code yet. But when we get there, it'll be ready. And there we go. So that looks a lot nicer, doesn't it? Yeah, so now, with regard to the code, well, I'm going to have to really move through this. So we have different ways we can deal with this code thing, because it being a derived value. This is something that you won't typically do. This is an unorthodox example of this, but I like to show it because it shows things you can do with other classes. So in Kotlin, classes are closed for extension by default. So you can't just willy-nilly extend a class. It's like a final class in Java, unless you create them with the open keyword, or if you have some kind of a plugin like a Kotlin all open plugin and specify the particular ones, particular annotations. Like Spring, we have a Spring wrapper plugin, so any components, configuration, add async, at transactional classes defined with those annotations, those are open for extension. But in the case you have something that isn't open for extension, you can create an extension function. I had to make sure I was saying that right so I didn't really confuse you. So it's something like a string. We can't modify the string-based class in Kotlin, but we could do something like double length, for instance. We'll do a double length, and we'll define that as this, the current value that you're considering. We'll take the length, and we'll, let's see, divide. No, let's see, how do we, having to kind of remember this. We'll just do +2, and we'll change this for, again, for speed. So add 2. So that's something you can do even though string is not able to be extended, modified per se. You can create an extension function. So we could do this for our coffee code, right? So we can do a coffee.code equals this dot name dot to lowercase dot replace any spaces with dash. Okay. A little unorthodox. Probably wouldn't do this way because we have the code right here, but you could. You can also set a val, right? So we can do val get. Yeah, that should work. Yep. So we can do an extension value as well, or variable. Again, not something you do in this particular case because we have the code right here, but you can. And in other cases, it works, and something you would probably do. So here's what we would normally do since we have the code right here. We'll just create our val here, and there you go. That's not terrible, right? And if you really want to, you can bring that up. Code get, yeah. So if you didn't have to do any of this, if you didn't want to override anything, if you didn't have any derived values, this would be your entire domain class right there. That's pretty nice, right? So it's much easier to see, to debug, to work with. All right. So in order to get this to run, what I need to do is go back to my constructor because, again, here we're doing a new coffee, and this is from Java code. It has one parameter that's now being passed into the ID position. So we just need to say, hey, leave that null and pass in name as name. So that'll work. Now, since we're close on time, I'm going to do what you should never, ever, ever, ever do. I'm going to do a big bang test at the end and trust everything will work. Those of you who are laughing, you just outed yourself. I'm sorry. Anyway, okay. So we've got our coffee class converted. So let's speed things up, shall we? I want to show you a neat little trick here that IntelliJ has. Anyone ever notice this? It's like, okay, in some cases there really is magic, right? So this is a little bit of magic. So I'm going to convert this Java file to a Kotlin file, and let's face it, it's 3 lines. How can you go wrong? And we see here that IntelliJ is rightly seeing that this is a Kotlin interface. So we'll just grab this, we'll drag it down, and refactor it where it's in the packaging. We'll trust that that works, and we'll move on to the controller. And that works so well, let's do it again. This is a little more challenging, but should work. And we're seeing now that we get a little bit of a warning here. I need to zoom up on that a little. There we go. Some code in the rest of your project may require corrections after performing this conversion. Do you want to find such code and correct it too? Why, yes, please. Okay, so what could go wrong, right? All right, so we go back out and look, and this is a little messier, right? It's not terrible, and they've done some things out of an abundance of caution, but we see here that we have a couple of functions and we have a val, and it treated it a little differently, and that's fine. It does still work, but I like to keep things fairly consistent. I'm a little OCD in that regard. So we'll go back and we'll address this momentarily, but let's get into this now, and we'll start and work our way down. So for starters, again, this is a single expression, so we can just do an equals and do a direct assignment. And then we also in Kotlin have type inference, so we can specify the return type of a function, but we don't have to, right? Oops, bring that up. And we can see that it rightly groks that this is returning a coffee. So that simplifies that nicely. So now we go down here to our search, and we see that we've still, as we did in Java, specified that the request parameter is not required. But we also see that our Kotlin type is an optional string, or a string, a nullable string, I should say. So it seems a bit redundant, right? Because we're kind of saying the same thing twice. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that? And we can. So that simplifies things a little bit. And here we'll do the same thing again with an assignment. Get rid of the return, because if and else are expressions. They return values in Kotlin. So we can do a direct assignment based on a condition. And of course, this isn't unique to Kotlin, but I like to do this when you have, again, that single expression. And that cleans that up. You can even put them on the same line should you want to. And we can do a little bit better than just a straight comparison to null, right? Because Kotlin has functions, I should say, is null or empty, is null or blank, is not null, or is blank, is empty. And we're going to check to see if it's null or if it's an empty value. Because in our case, when you're searching, whether you provide an empty, like no search criteria, or if you have an empty string, it should probably do roughly the same thing in our case. So we'll just say is null or empty. We can also simplify this from grabbing the iterator to just a first. So that cleans that up a bit. And yeah, so that's, I think that looks pretty good, right? Look at that. Okay, so that's not bad. Oh, again, type inference for the win. Boom. Those of you with sharp eyes will see the exclamation point. This is because this is coming from Java. If we go and look at our find all, we see that this is an iterable of type T. This is a Java class. Spring Framework is written in Java. So the fact that it is coming from Java means that Kotlin says, I can only provide the level of guarantees that Java provides in case this is a Java class. So it gives you that little signal and shows you that this is a platform type, so to speak. And that's just what the little exclamation point is. Whoops, let's see, controller. There we go. Okay, so now to change this, I'm going to just bring this up and we'll change this. Ha. Oh boy, okay, there we go. We'll change this from a val to a fun. There we go. Okay, so that's pretty simple. The only thing we have left to convert is our main application class. And this gets a little bit more involved, but let's try it, shall we? So let's see. Okay, I'm gonna have to go out of distraction-free mode and code, convert. And once again, we get the little question, changes have been made. Wow, that's interesting. Not sure what happened there. Okay, so here we've got a little bit more complexity. It didn't necessarily handle our command line runner being that well, so we'll come back to that here momentarily. I'm also going to close off our class definition here because in Java, of course, the public static void main, our main method is a static method, right? Here we're converting this, or it's converting this, and it's making this a static method as well for all instances. We don't necessarily need that, so we're going to just get rid of this. Kotlin also has top-level functions, so then we can clean that up, bring this down. This still looks very Java-ish, Spring Application.Run. We've even got the class, the Java class here that it's invoking. We can make this a bit more idiomatic with Kotlin. So we've got our run application. We use our Kotlin class. There we go. And now to clean up our command line runner, bean, we will do this the Kotlin way. And of course, the reason this changes, well, actually, let me go back here and we'll kind of do this where it silences some of the howls of protest. And then I'm going to comment that one out just again. So with Kotlin, when you have a lambda as a parameter in a method, or a function, I should say, you can have that all enclosed in parens, or if it's the last parameter, you can actually put the lambda outside of the parens, right? So you can have this. But the parens are kind of a nicety, right? They're just extra noise that we can get rid of entirely. So here we have our lambda, and we're doing the same thing. We're deleting all. We'll change this arrays as list to a list of, which again is that Kotlin idiomatic way of doing things. We have our names, automatically converts to stream for us. And again, as I mentioned with the command line runner, you can have this like this, but it's not needed when you have a lambda. We can simplify this as well because we don't need to provide the placeholder parameters because we have named parameters. So we can assign our name coming in to the name property. We can also just change this to it because the default property when there's a single parameter to the lambda is it. And of course, since that's the default, we can just get rid of that as well, which simplifies things quite nicely. Same thing here. We can just do repo.save it to whatever is being passed in, it. And that's nice. Now to change this, this is telling us that we have a consumer of coffee and it's providing the lambda, or we have our lambda here. But really, system.out.println or Kotlin println is a consumer. We don't need to add that extra noise, so there we have it. So let's go ahead and rerun this. And wow, I don't know why it keeps doing that. That's really odd. Okay, so we're up and running. Everything seems to be working, but the proof's in the pudding, right? So we'll http://8080/coffees. That works. Let's grab our macchiato this time. That works. And we'll do a search. Name equals Irish coffee. And we'll do that. But what happens again if we just say name equals? That works. We still get our default. So that's a little extra nicety that Kotlin's flexibility gives us. And then, of course, if we just search with nothing, we still get the same thing. So it all works. So now we've gone from, let me see, let's get rid of this. Actually, so we've gone from, it's much more code to much less here, much less code here now. And the repository, of course, is the same. Controller is much cleaner as well. So it really reduces your cognitive load while still maintaining all of that context. So just to wrap it up really quickly, because we are actually a minute over. Amazingly, we managed to finish pretty much on time, so that's not bad. Helpful resources. I need to update the repo. So if you would, if you are interested in seeing the latest, greatest code, go ahead and watch or start the repo, and in the next couple of days, I'll push the updates to it, and then you'll get notified when the updates are there. And then Spring.io for all the various different Spring projects, so you can find out more information as well as Kotlin information. But KotlinLang.org is provided by JetBrains, by the folks who bring us Kotlin. And that's a great starting place. Good documentation, really good. And then Kotlin.link tells you about Kotlin events and things being organized around the language itself. And with that, I think we're done. So thanks so much for coming. And we still have phone, so that's good.